Sequels, prequels, remakes, reboots, soft reboots, side movies, everything's gotta be a cinematic universe nowadays. But the original movie is always the best, right? Well, maybe not. So let's go over some of the sequels that are far better than the original. It's a subjective list, of course, but you know what? I'm right. I'm Joey C. Let's go! The original Top Gun is a beloved classic, right? An iconic star vehicle for Tom Cruise. It changed the way how Hollywood blockbusters looked, how they sounded, and even how they were marketed.
I feel the need for speed.
It's one of the most 80s things ever created by humans. But in a lot of ways, it was also the first blockbuster of the 1990s. Without Top Gun, there is no Michael Bay. So yeah, it's a classic. It's a piece of cinema history. But have you watched it recently? Because one could argue that it really doesn't hold up that well. So when making a 30 years later sequel to Top Gun, Tom Cruise and the team made some smart changes. Obviously, the flight sequences are more real, more tense, and more visually incredible. Naturally, the moments of bonding and triumphant teamwork are more bonded and more triumphant. But they also make the wild decision of including a decent script, a solid emotional core, and actual character arcs. You know, beyond the whole Tom Cruise knows he's the best, then wonders if maybe he isn't the best, then discovers he's actually, yeah, he's the best. And $1.5 billion and 6 Oscar nominations later, yeah, you could say this is the best legacy sequel of all time. Of course, that's the most recent example. Stick around and we'll go back through the decades of movie history. But first, Puss in Boots, baby. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, to be more precise. Way back in 2004, DreamWorks released Shrek 2, a sharp and hilarious sequel that took some iconic characters on a new exciting journey that arguably improved upon the much-loved original. But this isn't about Shrek 2. I only bring it up because Shrek 2 introduced the character of Puss in Boots, voiced by Antonio Banderas.
Puss!
This entry is actually about his 2022 movie, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, sequel to the 2011 movie Puss in Boots, which was a spin-off set sometime after the 2010 movie Shrek Forever After, the fourth movie in the mainline Shrek series, which, anyways, we're getting sidetracked. Why is The Last Wish superior to the original Puss in Boots? Well, for a start, the visuals. A combination of 2D and 3D animation is super striking, and really makes the book stand out from a lot of the more sammy-looking DreamWorks pictures. Also, who is expecting a Shrek spin-off with a mature, complex, and sometimes even dark story about accepting mortality? Plus, the jokes really aren't that bad in that movie.
Hey, I'm gonna bust you up, plum thumb, and then I'm gonna wear your clothes! That was weird.
You want to know what else isn't that bad? Liking and subscribing. And you know what? I'd even go as far as saying it's really good, and we'd appreciate it. Paddington's a delightful movie, right? Imaginative visuals, a cute and funny script, lots of highly qualified British actors being incredibly charming, a polite CGI bear that everyone falls in love with. What's not to like? The problem is, when making a movie like that, you gotta ask yourself, what do you do? In the case of Paddington 2, the answer was double down on everything that everybody liked about the first movie. You like the visuals, son? We're turning them up to 11. You like the cute and funny script? Wow, what if it was both cuter and funnier? You liked the highly qualified British actors being incredibly charming? Here's Hugh Grant serving choice cuts of ham. You liked the cute and polite CGI bear? Well, in this movie, he's breaking out of prison with the only 2 attributes you could possibly have in prison: politeness and baking. Baking? Yeah, baking. And look, clearly they did something right. If you Google Paddington 2, here are some of the questions that people tend to ask. Why is Paddington 2 such a good movie? Is Paddington 2 one of the best movies ever? I rest my case. Let's move on to Mad Max Fury Road. Okay, here's a pitch. It's a sequel, made several decades later, to a scrappy low-budget trilogy, where the third movie was not great. It was made by the same director, who is now in his 70s, who has spent the years between these sequels making Babe, Pig in the City, Happy Feet, and Happy Feet 2. Oh, and the actor who starred in the original trilogy has had, let's say, a controversial decade, so he won't be returning. so they're recasting the main guy. Doesn't necessarily sound like a recipe for financial and critical success, does it? And yet, Mad Max Fury Road was one of the best action movies of the last 10 years. Of the 21st century even. An insane visual spectacle, with some of the wildest practical stunts ever put on screen. Oh, and Tom Hardy being a mumbling weirdo as Max. The lessons? Boy, I wasn't prepared for this. Probably don't bet against the Happy Feet guy, right? He's not a foot guy who's happy, he's the guy who made Happy Feet. You know what, we're gonna move on here. In 1977, George Lucas wrote and directed a little movie called Star Wars, and changed everything forever. Literally, it changed the universe. No one had seen anything like it before. The space battles, the weird aliens, the strange planets. It was a phenomenon, man. So big that we're still dealing with the ramifications 50 years later. Then, they released a sequel, and everyone's minds were blown once again. Now, you could argue that the original Star Wars, or Episode 4, or A New Hope, or whatever you want to call it, works better as a standalone film. Old George obviously says he always envisioned a 9-movie series, but we gotta take that with a pinch of salt. He had no idea he'd be able to make more. So the first movie stands on its own as a great piece of sci-fi action cinema. The Empire Strikes Back? Not necessarily so much. It's definitely the middle installment of the trilogy. You need to have seen the first one to know what's going on. It ends on a cliffhanger, so in a pure storytelling sense, maybe it's not superior. But come on, it looks better, it sounds better, the script is better, the character arcs are deeper and more complex, the story goes off to some weird, wild, crazy places, it has one of the most iconic twists in movie history. So yeah, you heard it here first. Empire is better than A New Hope. A hot take to end all the hot takes.
I love you.
I know.
Don't at me, please. I'm very sensitive. I don't read the comments because I'll cry. James Cameron is pretty good at sequels. A lot of people were pretty doubtful about Avatar 2, but audiences and critics seem to agree that it's at least as good as Avatar, if not a little bit better. It's probably going to make the same amount of money. If we go back to the 1980s, he made Aliens, a sequel to Alien that took some pretty radical risks. Risks that paid off pretty well. When he made a sequel to his own movie, The Terminator, he did it again! Taking everything that made the first one great and ramping it up to crazy proportions. You know, maybe this Cameron guy knows what he's doing. Terminator 2 Judgment Day is a sequel so big it's kind of hard to wrap your head around, even now. It was the most expensive movie ever made at the time. It has some of the best action set pieces in history, with stunts that still hold up today. It has pioneering CGI work. Oh, and it also has that bit where the Terminator reloads the shotgun by swinging it around in his hand. Now that's cinema. So let's be real. The first Sam Raimi Spider-Man is great, but it was hampered by two things. First, it took too long with Spider-Man's origin story before it got around to the main action.
Go Web! Fly!
2, some questionable choices regarding the villain. Willem Dafoe was an excellent choice for Norman Osborn, but his Green Goblin outfit looked pretty goofy, especially the immobile plastic face. Hey fellas, next time, just paint him green. But the second movie solved the villain problem wonderfully. Dr. Octopus. What a name. A villain who doesn't wear a mask. Between his tragic backstory and, being able to see his face, and with Spidey's origin already told, and such a fantastic villain in place, plus the chance to explore the classic comic book stories like Peter getting fed up and quitting as Spider-Man, it's no surprise that this is the best movie in the Raimi trilogy, and one so lovingly revisited in 2021's Spider-Man No Way Home. And did I mention that train fight in the movie? Because it has that goddamn train fight. When Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins came out, Batman was kind of in trouble. Batman and Robin made some money, but it was considered a financial disappointment overall. And also, everybody hated it. Not me. So in the minds of general audiences, the character was tainted. The answer? One of the better examples of a gritty reboot. Batman Begins is a solid, engaging start to a new Bat trilogy. Although the villains in that movie, they're kind of just eh. They had nothing on Heath Ledger's Joker. Even if the rest of The Dark Knight was substandard, Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker would be enough to elevate it to a position of greatness. It has an absolutely electrifying performance. one of the greatest of all time. And every time he's on screen, even after multiple rewatches, he still has you laughing, shivering, fidgeting in your seat. Guy is magnetic. And the rest of the movie is luckily not substandard. It has bigger explosions, bigger set pieces, and it's way more epic. With a complex plot and big questions to ask about the nature of heroism, good, evil, chaos, and the logistics of kidnapping Chinese bankers. Plus, truck flip. You gotta have a truck flip. Toy Story was a nice game changer for animation, family films, and the movie industry in general. It proved that an entire CGI story could be just as engaging as a traditionally animated one, and made Pixar a major player in the field going forward. It also introduced a bunch of characters who became instantly iconic and beloved for a generation of kids. The film definitely stands up today, but with all the advancements we've seen since, the seams on this classic are starting to show. The animation's great, but it's a little stiff, by modern standards at least, and the less said about some of the textures, the better. Likewise, the story is a lot of fun, but it's surprisingly simple. But only 4 years later, Toy Story 2 leveled up the franchise. With a more complex story, a city-spanning rescue mission, a visit to a toy store, and a bunch of new characters, and a ton of great jokes.
I'll never give in. You killed my father.
No, Buzz. I am your father.
And one of the earliest examples of Pixar going out of their way to make you cry. Plus, the animation is flawless. Now listen, don't get me wrong, Toy Story is very, 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 very good, but Toy Story 2 is better. Let's finish this with a nice, non-controversial entry about a little-known art film that most people haven't heard of. There are very few examples of a movie and its sequel both appearing in legitimate lists of the greatest films of all time. But the first two Godfather movies frequently do. And no, we're not going to talk about the third one. The Godfather was more than a gangster film, bringing a level of craft and narrative complexity that the genre had never even come close to before. It made prestige cinema out of a cheap, pulpy book, and most of its cast went on to become huge stars. Godfather 2 takes that complexity further, telling a story of a family across two time periods simultaneously. It's the continuing story of Michael Corleone, the previously sheltered son, who has become as great a mafia leader as his father once was. But it's also the story of his father, played in the first movie by Marlon Brando, and here by Robert De Niro, a Sicilian immigrant in New York City who learns how things work in his new home, and how much there is to be gained from a life of crime. These halves mesh seamlessly into one whole. A rare achievement in cinema. Everybody, thank you for watching. On a personal note, me and the co-writer disagreed on Back to the Future Part 2. He says the first one is a great movie, but the second one is just okay. I don't know how we're gonna get past this because I think Back to the Future 2 is fantastic. Maybe with a little time apart and some therapy, we can move on.